I think it's really hard to be yourself sometimes when you are starting and growing a coaching business. You're not sure what parts of yourself to talk about, what things to hold back on. And sometimes it feels like this giant block in front of you that you cannot break through. And so today I am joined by a coach. She's coming on and letting me coach her live. She's about to possibly rebrand her podcast and is feeling really stuck on which direction to take the podcast and her business after getting some new certifications and really feeling kind of stuck. So definitely stick around to the end because we talk about one really important thing that I think every coach should remember when it comes to growing their coaching business. So I hope you enjoy this episode of Live Coaching. Welcome to the BDC podcast. This is a live coaching episode. So if you're new to the show, one time a month, I bring on a coach and we talk about their business and we talk about a specific struggle that they are really in, a bottleneck maybe, or just like this stuck thing that's in front of them that they can't see past. And then I offer my coaching. And one of the reasons I do these episodes is because you listeners, probably some of you have the same struggle. And it's so helpful to hear from somebody else and to hear into somebody else's life and to know that you're not alone in the process. And so before we dive in with Samantha, which I'm going to let her introduce herself in just a moment, if you want to be coached live on the podcast, then there are spaces. We have 3 more left, I think, for the year. And so head on over to amanda-walker.com/live coaching, and you can fill out the application. And I'll meet you live right here, just like Samantha. So welcome to the show. So do you go by Sam, Samantha? What's your preference?
Sam's good.
Sam's good. It's innate. I don't know. So I feel like it's the athlete in me. I always have this tendency to go by the short name. So some people love that. Some people hate that. So I would love for you to just share with our audience first what you do and who you serve.
Yeah, so I help other women start their professional organizing businesses. I am currently still a professional organizer. I also am a certified life coach. So I do it a little different where instead of it being hey, here's $5,000, make my pantry perfect. It's more about the mindset, the emotional stuff, the things that are going to come up as to why you're holding on to the things you're holding on to, decluttering, that kind of stuff. So I have a podcast called Pro Organizers Coach where I help other women start their organizing businesses that are very similar, where we are actually trying to help our clients with the emotional, the mental, and the physical. And so, and then I have a course that I just recently launched in a group coaching community and all the things. And I listened to your podcast and I was listening to some of the episodes and the framework and the coaching. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that would help me so much because I'm about to rebrand for the 100th episode. And so, I'm super thankful for the opportunity.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to connect with you. It's an honor to be able to connect with listeners and then use the time to get as much accomplished as we can in our time together. And so one of the things that you kind of shared is that you would love to kind of have a game plan moving forward for the podcast and to build the group coaching community even more based on this kind of rebrand that you're hoping to kind of shift to in your 100th episode. So can you just speak more to what's the purpose of the rebrand? So when you say rebrand, what does that mean in your mind specifically? And kind of what's the purpose behind it in your perspective?
Yeah. So for me, rebranding is more of, when we first launch a podcast or our coaching, it's kind of broad. For me, for the podcast, it was a lot more of very tactical. Here's step 1 of starting your business. Here's, all of the very tangible, tactical things. And now I'm at a place where there's only so many women wanting to start a professional organizing business. And so my mind kind of goes back and forth, even as a coach, it goes back and forth between should I maybe go a little bit broader and kind of bring in other aspects of being an entrepreneur? Or should I actually kind of go more with the life coaching? And then also my faith is very important for my specific business. And I know the women that I've brought into my group coaching community, they're very similar. They love God. They love more of the decluttering specialist kind of thing, more so than the professional organizer, typical Pinterest or Pinterest perfect kind of stuff. And so for me, I even as I'm sitting here saying it, which I knew it would happen, right? When we get coached.
Usually how it does.
Yeah. I totally know that I need to start bringing in more of the faith episodes, but also the life coaching. And And I guess for me, I'm just getting not stuck, but trying to figure out like what type of stuff would actually help them. Because I don't have like an actual certification. I could get them coached like to where they could be a certified life coach, right? So I'm almost feeling this like, I guess inadequacy is kind of a good word for it, of like, oh, well, because I can't offer you this like certification to become a life coach to partner as a professional organizer, then how do I kind of bring in those pieces without, or do I go the other route and like partner with someone that does do life coaching certification, right? And so I don't know, there is just this kind of back and forth for me of like, how do I continue to support my listeners, but also then grow the podcast a little bit bigger than what it has been up until this point.
Okay. There is so much good stuff in this. There's a lot to coach on right here. We don't even have to move forward.
Okay.
I have like lots of questions around this because I was curious when you mentioned the rebranding, like for what purpose is rebranding? And I often find that rebranding happens because we feel limited, and often that's because it's self-imposed. We feel like there's this giant problem at hand, but really what I think often happens is we feel a misalignment in our business. And so we want to make adjustments to get back in realignment. And not that I'm not suggesting a rebrand. I just want to make sure that we're intentional with the rebrand strategy, or we make decisions on whether or not a rebrand even has to happen, or if our conversation together more today is going to be like permission to step more fully into who you are now that you know who you are when you get like a little further along in business, which is what honestly often happens. And so I want to ask a few clarifying questions. Your offering suite. So you mentioned you're still doing some professional organizing, like you're taking on a one-to-one clients. Mm-hmm. And then you have exclusively a group coaching program that teaches other professional organizers, right? So you're only doing group work there?
Yeah, well, yes and no. So I just launched my course, and the course is how to start. Yeah. The point of the course is to bring them into the community, which does group coaching. We meet once a week, and they've already either started or launched their business. And then from there, so like for me, my thought was, like I wanted to have a course, I wanted to have coaching, and I wanted to have community, because I wanted us to have like a sisterhood of women because as a professional organizer, you're a solopreneur, kind of like life coaches. It gets very lonely when you're, doing all this stuff on your own. And so for me, the group coaching community is like our sisterhood of passionate professional organizers. And we do the group coaching in there. Yes.
Okay, cool. So 2 things on this. I actually have many professional organizers who pull in life coaching or faith-based life coaching that have come through the SBL. So sometimes we think we're more alone than we are in what we do, or we think like, oh, there's not a lot of women that want to do this. Actually, there are. Like I already have these types of coaches in my community. So just to reaffirm you that this is a thing, I don't even know if you are familiar with one of our previous guests, but he was, I'll drop a link in the show notes, Joshua Becker, but he's like the minimalist guru of all gurus. Mm-hmm. He's also faith-based driven, but he has a certification on minimalism, declutter, etc. And that interview, which has probably been a year old now, like totally opened my eyes to this world of decluttering that existed in the pro organizer space. So I'm sharing that just to let you know, I think there's more people out there like you that are doing this work and that want to do this work, just to validate and reaffirm, the direction. And so I want to check some boxes first. The one thing that I really love about what you just told me is it's an ascension model that, other than throw out the one-to-one coaching that you're doing collectively by yourself still as far, or one-to-one organizing, that's kind of your one-off offer. That could actually still be an ascension model. Like you might impact that person so much they're like, okay, Sam, I want to do what you're doing. So that's great. And eventually maybe the other thing grows and you don't do that anymore. You keep just a few clients at a time. But what I love about the course and the group, just based on what you said so far, is they are both for pro organizers. So that is important because one thing leads to another, and there's a way for a tiered offering to happen. And the reason that's important is the question you asked me is, should I go more broad or not? And my direct response would be, I wouldn't change anything about who it's for. We want to speak to only pro organizers. So my question is really like, do we need to rebrand? Is it necessary to change the title? I don't think so. What's the title of the podcast? It's the Pro
so it's Pro Organizers Coach is the name of the podcast. And I guess for me, when I was thinking rebranding, it was more of like changing the podcast art, changing the description, that kind of stuff.
Yes, and that's exactly what I was going to say is to answer is, should I go more general life or entrepreneurs? Everybody's doing that. So why would you make yourself look like you're already kind of becoming a little bit of a purple duck in the coach space because you're calling out specifically people that want to coach around around organization. So if it were me sitting in your seats, this would not be a change I would make to go more broad. I would stay in my wheelhouse doing what I know I'm good at. Mm-hmm. And then if the rebrand existed, it would be just like fresh graphics, fresh photos if you're taking them. What I would concentrate more on is, are you SEO optimizing for this? Are you being strategic in the way you're rolling out your episodes? Are you planning your content diligently to really meet the needs of your people? Because I think that's where the growth thing is going to happen more than a rebrand. Like nobody's going to all of a sudden show up more to listen to your podcast because you called it something different. That is right. General. If anything, it's going to be, maybe it could garnish more listeners. But the thing is if it garnishes entrepreneurs, you have nothing to sell them and no way to monetize it because you only want to monetize through pro organized offers. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And I think you're right on the optimizing more for, and like, my one-off stuff. So I'm still currently working as a professional organizer in Knoxville. So like, to me, that's kind of my day job. Right. Mm-hmm. And then the podcast, everything online is kind of like my evening job, so to speak. But I love the fact that I'm still working with clients because when I go to create content or when I go to do group coaching, I'm still in it. I'm still working with clients every day. I'm not like separated from it. And so for me, that's been super important to do that. But yeah, no, I absolutely. And I think kind of where I'm getting not stuck, but as a life coach, sometimes you can feel, or even a business coach, whatever you want to call it, as a coach, sometimes you just feel like you don't have enough tools. Like as an organizer, I know I'm a great organizer. I've been doing this for years. I can go in with a client. I know what I'm talking about. And a lot of times, even when I'm teaching live, like in my Facebook group or these different things, like it'll start to flow and I'm like, oh, I do know what I'm doing when it comes to the business side, right? But then when you start talking about the life coaching side, like the emotional stuff, the mental stuff, I know how to do it with clients. I guess where I'm getting a little stuck is trying to teach how I do it with clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Well, let's hit that and then we'll talk about kind of this whole life coaching element of it. This is just my personal belief that any coaching niche you are in, we're never coaching on the topic. We're life coaches. Like underneath everything is this element of life coaching. And if we're not, then what I would say is we tend to fall into that like consultant space where we're like, here, go do the thing. But we know, right? Just as I'm sure when you're working with your clients who you're doing organizing with is you could do the things for them, but it's when you leave the house, the question is, are they going to maintain the systems? Are they going to maintain the same balance and alignment with their priorities that you guys talked about when you were in there doing the work, right? And this is where that element of life coaching comes in. Two things that come up for me. One is this is the newer piece, right? Naturally to the entire conversation. And you've done new things in your life a million times, I would assume. Mm-hmm. And it's like I go back to, this is just like a random thing that comes into my brain. So I'm going to say it is like I go back to breastfeeding. Like the first time I ever nursed a kid, it was clunky. I was like, what the heck am I doing? It was kind of miserable. I didn't know. I flailed around. She flailed around. And then like 6 weeks in, we're like, okay, we're getting a groove, starting to feel more confident. By like 6-8 months, I was like, dude, I am a professional. And then the next kid around came and I was like, yes, I got this. And so I think that is going to be true of the way you weave in the life coaching, faith-based elements into this is the more you talk about it, you're going to gain that steam, like that momentum where you step back, just like you said, you didn't go like, oh, I freaking know what I'm talking about. Like this feels really, really good. And notice the topics that you're talking about when you find that, because that's also going to give light to maybe even where like you are the most confident in the life coaching element.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's absolutely true. And I actually just had this conversation the other day where I was actually coaching someone else on it. We're like, when you first start something, like obviously it feels new. It's kind of like, oh, do I know what I'm doing? Do I not? Yeah, So thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. Right. We're always the reflection of our clients and what we need to. Let's go strategy though. I mean, this is my shameless plug because this is my zone of genius. Is I also think that if you've been spending all your time in this pro organizer space, you probably have a framework for which you go into somebody's house and the methodology and process for which you declutter and teach them naturally, right? That looks very different now when we're going to reproduce it and we're going to teach people our methodology. So we're like, how do I get into the brain of Sam when she's in here and build a framework around it? Because I've got to now get these pro organizers to go out and like replicate the process that I know is tried or true. And so, I mean, my shameless plug is the Framework Builder Lab does exactly this, right? This is the whole point of where you're feeling stuck is why I teach the framework building process so much. Is it's one thing when we get results, that's great. It's another thing when we can get other people to have the same results. So we've got to step outside of it and we've got to go, okay, how can I build this repeatable process and weave in this element of life coaching? Is it a specific framework per session that I teach them? Is it this process where we do the declutter work first and then we do, I know your faith's important. We do some sort of faith component to it on each session. Like, I don't know what that is for you, but that's where you get to play in that creative space and ask yourself, okay, I can get it to work. Now, what are the steps I need to teach to get other people to work? And what I often find, and I'm not suggesting you're doing this, is that we haven't really started at the end and asked ourselves, like, but where do I want all these people in my group coaching program to be? And once I know that, the question is, how do I reverse engineer the milestones and the baby steps to guarantee that they're able to walk their clients through the same success, that you were doing? Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. Yeah. And I was actually, I almost signed up for the Framework Builder Lab. And then I was like, wait, I know I have this coaching session coming up, so I'm just going to wait because I wasn't sure.
Glad you did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. I think what I've been recording all day and I was just with one of the students that are graduates. And so what she said was so great. It was kind of like this space of moving for a done for you system into a done with you, which is really where you are. You've been doing the work yourself. And now what you're going to say is, I'm going to teach you to do that work. And so it takes some practical steps to get outside of it and really hover around it with, I think, a bit of, you're so in it, right? It's like you're can't read the label from inside the bottle. And so it takes a different eye to really look at that. And I obviously inside the lab teach some strategic ways to make that happen. But I think once you were to have a more solidified framework, things like showing up in those group sessions, talking about the life coaching element, why it's necessary to have that, you're going to feel more confident in talking about it, right? Because like I said before, it's not about the process. It's about the action they take once you leave. And that's where life coaching and coaching in general can become so powerful in the process.
Yeah, well, and I love that too, because that's also obviously going to lend itself to content as well, which is always a big piece, of like, okay, so now what do I talk about? Especially whenever it's as a podcast, like a lot of podcast episodes are a little bit longer in length than just like, a Facebook post or an Instagram reel or, and so being able to really dive deeper into those steps, I think will also then help me with the content piece as well, because then each one of those little steps obviously becomes a piece of content that I can then share as well.
We talk about really once you have a framework, it becomes the backbone of your business. It becomes what you're known for. It becomes the content pillars. It becomes the micro pieces of content. But you got to take the time to like craft that and really see what it looks like from outside. A couple other things I'd love to just offer is this piece of life coaching, this faith part, which is important to you. And then you've got the organizing part is when you go to plan your content on your podcast, like what's your strategy around it? What do your episodes look like every month?
So as of right now, I do, it's kind of half and half. So I do some interviews with people that either inspire me or have, like a specific thing that will help professional organizers.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also do some of the teaching ones. And I've found that a lot of the ones where I teach are actually better, even though for the longest I was doing more of the interview style because they were easier to do.
Yeah.
And so I've been diving more into like the teaching ones. And yeah. So did that answer your question of like the...
That's exactly it. Yep. So some suggestions, because ultimately you're like, I want to grow the podcast. Obviously you want to grow listenership, you want to grow clients, all the things. So I encourage you, and I can send just as a follow-up for everyone listening, my friend Adam Scheibel, he runs the Podcasting Business School. He did an episode. He was a guest on my show, but then he actually audited my podcast. And one of the things I learned is just the opportunity for SEO optimization. I really encourage you to go back. It was a coaching clinic Friday. It says like live podcast audit. I think you're going to learn a lot from him working on my show of the opportunities you have to go back in and deepen the description, the title. And you don't have to do that as a rebrand. Like you could do that tomorrow. And nobody but us is probably going to recognize that. But what will be of advantage is that when somebody goes to search for like pro organizers or organizers, and if we have more of that keyword stuffing in there, then it's going to lead more to you. And anytime we can improve organic searchability of your podcast, that's like one really super simple way. And as a fun fact, I would like, before you make those changes, after you listen, just jot down the date. Make sure you take record of the date you do that. And then look at what the 30 and 60, 90 like downloads are of that and see if you can see, an improvement. I like that you already started pulling guest interviews. I think that a lot of people, and I did too, I thought, I'm going to have people on my podcast, and the more people that come on my podcast, it's going to get me out in front of more audience. And I think that is true if it's an aligned place. What is actually same thing. I mean, my most downloaded episodes are my teaching episodes because ultimately your audience is coming for Sam.
Yeah.
Right. And so they build rapport with you. They fall in love with you. They want to hear what you have to say. The one opportunity that I would encourage you to do is actually the exact type of episode you and I are doing right now. If you could start sprinkling in once a month or at least every other month a coaching episode where you invite, it could be a current client or a listener or something on your show, and coach them live. I mean, you can use our process. We don't care. We want you to be successful. Is what this episode is doing is everybody that's listening gets to hear me coach you, and it establishes my credibility and authority in what I do. And so they're like, oh, Amanda knows her stuff. Mm-hmm. Like I have that problem. And so what that does is that's building the fast track to rapport and trust with you. And so that would be something that I would suggest. So you might change up like 2 solo casts, a coaching session, and then a guest interview. And again, those 2 are pretty easy because you just show up and coach, and then the guests, you'd show up and interview. Those are easy. And then, be very intentional about those other 2 pieces. And I think that's where you can begin to weave in these elements of life coaching and faith. Like, why is it necessary? Start telling me, how you bring faith into your coaching. And you don't have to say every coach, pro organizer needs to be a faith-based person. But what you are giving me permission is to be myself. If Sam's here talking about how important God is to her and she brings it into her coaching, then that's going to give somebody else permission to talk about like health being so important to them, and how can they weave health into their organizing, and how can they focus maybe kitchen first and everything, like I'm just making that up, but I think that could be like a viable, importance to somebody. And so I don't know if this is just a ticket to permission, but the more you can be you and talk about your struggles and have a candid conversation, like, hey, record an episode. I've been struggling. I don't feel like this podcast, I'm fully being myself because I've limited the topics of conversation. So I just want you to know I'm going to be talking about these things, and you either love me for it or ultimately you don't. And if somebody that's listening to your show does not value your faith, your relationship, and your faith, then they're really not an ideal client anyways. And we would rather them find out by listening to your podcast than join your program. And they're like, whoa, Sam, I didn't know this about you. Like, I want out. So that's why I think it's really important to make sure you're talking about that journey as a part of your episodes. They don't have to be the focus, but they can be easily woven in.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I do have some live coaching episodes as well. But I think where, like what you were just saying is super important I think it's more about, because I think that's where I was getting stuck, is that exact moment of like, this is how I do it, but I don't want to be that coach that is like, here's how I do it. You need to copy and paste me. I don't ever want to be that. I want to be the one that, like you said, inspires you to figure out who you are and how you can partner that with organizing, and that can open up doors for you and find your people. And so I think that's exactly where I was getting stuck, was that I didn't want people to copy what I was doing per se. And I didn't want them to feel like it has to be this way. And so I think I was pulling back a little bit. But I love what you said. It's more about helping them understand that, like, listen, being myself is what got me here. So you have permission to be your authentic self.
Yes, for sure. So if I were going to record a podcast episode about that, I might say, like, how to stand out as a pro organizer. That might be the title of my show. Mm-hmm. And I might talk about my unique differences in the structure. And it might be, again, I'm just making this up. I don't know anything about your systems, but maybe it is that when you go into a person's house for the first time, you like open up in prayer, like you pull the person together and there's a prayer that leads you or a prayer that closes. And you're going through your system. And then you say, like, here's my invitation today, though. This is my methodology. I'm asking you, what makes you unique? What leads you? Is it health, fitness? Is it family first? What is it? Like, how can you bring in something unique and special into your pro organizing business so you're not just another generic stale vanilla organizer, but you've got like this sweet sauce, about you. And so that's how I might kind of pull it in strategically, and then deliver them kind of the permission to be themselves.
I love it. That's exactly like that right there. That's what I needed, was because I kept thinking, I'm like, there's something that I'm not like giving the permission, or like knowing that I'm needing to give the permission for, like I'm stuck at that place. And it was exactly that. So thank you.
Yay. I love when we can really nail it. And so just start thinking about that. Ultimately, here's the interesting thing about building a personal brand is we've created the success we have because we've done it like our way, but we've also probably learned from people that have taught us things. But even when we learn from somebody else, we don't necessarily, anytime we try to do it exactly like them, I mean, I don't know if you've been, it never works for me that way. I'm like, if I try to just copy and paste, it never works for me because they are not me. They don't have my personality. But remember, what you're doing is giving a roadmap. And along the way, they're figuring out how to enjoy that process and that road, and they're pulling in the things that they want, pushing out the things that they don't want. But it's your job to show up as the authority and start to give them ideas to get their creative juices flowing so they can be more themselves. Because what you're feeling right now is just misalignment. It's no big deal. Like, you could totally rebrand. But I really think what you're trying to do is just find yourself and weave in all parts of yourself so you're not really compartmentalizing the process of who you are. And once you kind of like are like, cool, I can be myself, then momentum is coming.
Love it. And then real quick, I actually had a question about your lab. So I whenever I went to sign up, I saw that it was like I think the $297, but then with the additional live coaching, do you care to tell me real quick like the difference, just so I know?
Yeah, of course. So the independent study is the $297, which means you just go in, you like do it yourself, consume the content on your own, build your framework on your own. What I know is people love accountability and also love to have just this time with me to ask questions. And so you can upgrade into the live experience. And when you do that, you get everything in the modules and such and all the bonuses, but you also get 6 additional live coaching sessions, and they're in group format. So every Wednesday I coach in the lab at 11 a.m. Pacific. So if you were to sign up today, for instance, not that you are, but just assuming, then tomorrow you could jump right in. You would have 6 weeks of live coaching. So you can bring your questions. We workshop just as you asked me, I'm feeling stuck. This is blocking me, help me. And then you're in a community of other coaches that are kind of going through the process in simultaneous ways. So people love that. Most people honestly choose that because it does give that space to be live with me and ask questions through the process.
I love it. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Amazing. I am so glad we could create clarity for you and help you bridge confidence, and more importantly, just be yourself, which is so important in business building. Those listening, though, I'm sure some would love to connect with you and learn more about your business. So can you tell us, you have a podcast, so give a shout out to the podcast, and also maybe direct us to a social channel that you're most active. So if anybody wants to connect, they can find you.
Yeah, so I've actually been growing my YouTube channel, which is fun. It's at Professional Organizers Coach. But proorganizerscoach.com has all of the links. And again, the podcast is called Pro Organizers Coach. I tried to keep it very simple. I'm all about simple, simplicity, not trying to make it complicated. But yeah, a lot of the, I try to teach things in a way that, like, again, I have learned so many things between starting a business, becoming a life coach, like a lot of stuff, even though it's specifically for professional organizers, it's a lot of things that have also helped me on my journey of being an entrepreneur and being a life coach, and how to weave those things in together. So yeah, come check it out.
We thank you for sharing all of that. And I just really appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing where you're at. Letting other people learn from you is so valuable. So thank you for just being here with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.